This is the Raw and Radical Women in the Arts podcast, and I am your host, Maureen Broadbeck.
Raw, unprocessed.
In each episode, we explore the mechanisms of identity, vulnerability, authenticity, empowerment, and social change through conversations with inspiring women who are making history and challenging the status quo in both the art world and in society.
Radical, rebel, progressive.
We talk about their real-life challenges and celebrate cis and transgender women so that you can be inspired, empowered, take action, and further your critical understanding about what it means to be a woman in the arts.
Woman, feminism. A revolutionary catalyzing reformation. Radical.
Today we are welcoming erotic photographer and journalist Renée Jacobs. Renée studied photography at ICP to be a photojournalist. She worked for newspapers such as the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer. She received the Robert F. Kennedy Award for outstanding coverage of the disadvantaged, and her work is in the permanent collection of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library. She then became for 15 years a constitutional and civil rights litigator in the US before returning to photography in 2006. She started then to explore erotic photography with the female nude as a subject. She used this medium to assimilate her identities and to construct her vision of the female gaze and to build her definition of femininity and desire. She is the recipient of the International Photography Award for Fine Art Nude. Her work has been shown in exhibitions, books, and magazines. She has 4 monographs: Werkdruk in 2012, Renée Jacobs Paris in 2013, Rêve de Femme in 2014, and soon Polaroids that will come out this November. Her work was featured in Vanity Fair France, Elle Italia, Photo Vogue, Playboy Italy, PH Magazine, Fine Art Photo, Nude Magazine, French Photo, Black and White Magazine, Focus, amongst many others. She will be exhibiting her work alongside Helmut Newton's private property in the Photo Nostrum Gallery in Barcelona early next year. Please welcome Renée Jacobs. Hi, Renée. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So I would like to talk about your story and your involvement in activism. You are a former civil rights and constitutional litigator in the US, and you studied photojournalism. So you worked on gay rights cases starting in the 90s. And can you tell us about this transition you made from these two different kind of work and how they are related to each other?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people would look at the different career paths and not see a through line. And to me, they're complete bookends, one to the other. I guess if you can have a bookends that are a set of 3, I guess, because I started out in photojournalism, and that early work was very much activist work as well, because I had a book come out in the 1980s that was about an environmental disaster, and then that book led me to want to go to law school. And then from law school, I became involved in civil rights and constitutional litigation. And I ended up taking some early gay rights cases, as you mentioned, in the 1990s. And then when I stopped practicing law in about 2006, and I started doing female nudes photography, it very much felt like the same degree of activism to me. Yeah. The litigation that I was doing around gay rights was so much because I was struggling to come out then, and this was my way of acting out instead of coming out. So I didn't see myself reflected in the laws of the United States. I wasn't protected, I wasn't represented, and so my acting out in response to that was to get involved with litigation and to sue various governments and individuals and entities, for gay marriage or other rights cases. And then when I started to photograph female nudes, it was very much the same sort of motivation. I didn't see authentic representation in visual imagery of who I thought I was, what I was hearing from women about how they wanted to be represented. So they're very much the same, different sides of the same coin, I suppose.
Yeah. So what were the biggest challenge for you for this transition? as a woman? Because I'm guessing it's not so easy to stop something and jump into something different completely.
Yeah, I was sort of pushed.
Okay.
Yeah, I from very early on, I got in trouble, as a lawyer with the activism that I was doing at the very
Yeah.
beginning of my career. And so, because I got actually pushed out very early on, I never really established the legal career that someone who, like me, had 15 years in the practice of law. So I never really had the foothold because I was always pretty raw and radical in my legal
Yeah. Yeah.
work. And so that meant I never had a really solid foundation career-wise in the law. So when the recession hit, coming into 2008,
Yeah.
it meant that I didn't really have traction in the deep roots to survive, the sort of cuts that were happening across the legal profession. So I was sort of pushed out of that, and I just went back to picking up my old film cameras on a fluke as a lark. And it turned out I went on vacation with a woman I started seeing at the time, and I took the cameras and did some photographs of her that I thought were beautiful. And I had never had any interest in nudes. I thought they were exploitive. I thought they were boring. I had absolutely no interest when I was a photojournalist in doing nudes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it surprised me that I found any kind of resonance for me in the images that I took. And then it just sort of went from there.
It's really beautiful, actually, as a story, because sometimes when things get a bit difficult in our life, we resist. We try to hold on to what's there, and you actually follow the flow, and it brought you here. So this is really beautiful, I think, and it's a good story.
Yeah, well, thanks. Because I mean, you never know when you take that initial leap or you have that initial shove in the back, out the door.
Yeah.
And then I don't know that things always work out the way they're supposed to, but I think as you age, as you get older as a woman, your bullshit meter is different and
Yeah.
your survival instincts are different. And so, the things that fulfill you and sustain you become very different. The things that you realize really are important. And my wife sort of opened my eyes when we got together with this amazing phrase, and her answer to everything is use your words.
Yeah.
And so, this idea of presenting your emotional, real self, to the person you're with, to yourself, to the outside world, I just think it's sort of a critical tenet to live by.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. So what made you decide to explore erotic photography and the female body in particular? Because you could have gone to explore many different things about, around this theme you're interested in, the activism, rights, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the last photojournalism that I did before I went to law school, I was out photographing the Ku Klux Klan in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And, doing that sort of thing. But I think when I started taking female nudes, and I started with the very traditional, the sort of bodyscape photography of women's bodies, and, no faces were revealed. It was all just, light and shadow. And very quickly that came to not just bore me, but bother me. That it really felt like it wasn't an authentic representation of sensuality, of desire, of, all of the things that I felt I didn't understand about myself, in being a lesbian. And so I wanted to give voice to a more authentic representation of desire. And so I sort of call the work that I do erotic journalism. But yeah, to me, it's activism.
Yeah, yeah. You said something very beautiful, and I would like to quote you for that. You said, for so long, women have been told to hide their sexuality or pretend it doesn't exist, or have it only exist to sell soap or shampoos, but not to own the pride and the power behind it. Sexuality is incredibly powerful. I love that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I often say that, women's sexuality in general and lesbian sexuality in particular, it's either erased or exploited, but it's very rarely empowered. And
Yeah.
that's something that I wanted to do. I really wanted to explore. And it's funny because it just sort of evolved very organically.
Mm.
As I was photographing, women individually and doing nudes, the number one request that I would get is, can you find me another model to pose with? I've always been curious, or I really want to explore that. It's like, you know what? Okay, I hear what you're telling me. And, so many women came to me with different desires and things, and requests just come flooding back to me. I'll share one that I think was just amazing. I was photographing for my Paris book, and this must have been in Paris in probably about 2011, 2012. And there was a model that I'd been photographing quite a bit. Stunning woman. I mean, cheek bones like Audrey Hepburn, just classy, gorgeous, stunning woman. And we were out one night at a burlesque show with some friends, and somehow she just steered the conversation around to ropes. And, and she just kept joking about ropes, and it didn't register with me, and then the next morning I woke up and I thought, that's her thing. I've been shooting with her for years, and, she's been edging up to telling me what her authentic self desired. And so I called her up and I said, okay, so-and-so, go get some rope or whatever, and come by my flat at 3:00 and, we'll do something. So she shows up with rope, and apparently she had taught herself how to tie herself up on the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
She'd never shared this with the husband, with her lover, no one. And, but she brought this to me as, okay, this is my thing. This is my jam. And, I want to explore this.
Yeah.
And so many women that I photographed, those are the kinds of things that would come out. This one likes this one wants to walk down the Champs-Elysees naked. This one wants to try being with a woman. This one wants that. It's just, for me, so much of the photography that I do and that resonates for me from other photographers is where women get to use an authentic voice like that.
Yeah. So in a way, you give them a space to be and to own their own sexuality.
Yeah, completely. And what I understood about that was the more that I gave women, the ability to place themselves on that spectrum,
Yeah.
the more I understood myself. So, suddenly just being a lesbian was so vanilla. It was fantastic. It was such a great way of me understanding that there was nothing wrong with me, that there was nothing wrong with my sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Everybody is on this very, very long continuum somewhere, and it's all great. It's all fine.
Yeah, because you said something else that I also wrote down to quote you about this exactly. And this is what you say. You say, these were the photos the model wanted me to make of them as they explored their own sexual spectrum. And artistically exploring the infinite and powerful gem of woman's desire made me understand and accept my own.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that's where I think the sort of visual activism comes in. Understanding their stories made me a much richer participant in my own.
Yeah.
All of the things that we doubt about ourselves as women, that we're told we're not allowed to want, we're not allowed to desire.
Yeah.
And if you throw that open to a random group of women, you're going to get things all across the spectrum. And it's incredibly enlightening.
Yeah.
I think it's so much easier these days with social media. But, back in the day when I was coming out in the 90s, it's like we had no role model.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we certainly didn't have visual touchstones about our desires being healthy and okay. We just didn't have, at least I didn't have those.
Well, I think many women did not have it. And what's beautiful is that I realize also from my career that when we work on subject, whatever those are, we do something for a subject, for an idea, but it's an exchange and it goes right back to us. It always makes us grow, and it always makes grow someone else. And this is what I think is so enriching, and it brings us so much, because there's just so many things to be discovered, to be explored, to be taken from inside out of us, to give to outside, to give to the world, and it's so rich.
Yeah, that's so beautifully true. And I think the other part of that as well is that for so many years, women have not been present in the presentation of our stories, our visual stories. And men have been the gatekeepers about what images of women should be like and look like. And so we're still today having books and exhibits on the female nude where not a single female photographer is included, certainly not a lesbian. And not long ago, I searched in the MEP, Maison Européenne Photographie website, just out of curiosity to see what they had in terms of lesbian representation. And so I searched the word lesbian, and it came up with one entry, and that was an exhibit. You know where I'm going with this. An exhibit by a male photographer of his lesbian dreams. And, you know, it's yay.
Yay.
Yay. You know, and I'll be the first one to say that there are many male photographers that do beautiful work around portraying women. But, you know, and I think there are plenty of women that do very poor work of, you know, photographing women. It goes both ways. But the bottom line is that women just have not been represented in telling these stories. And we accept this version of male gaze without questioning it, without queering it. It just felt like a really opportune time to jump into helping to visually tell our stories.
Yeah, we can enrich this dialogue very much, I think.
Yeah.
Because one version is cool, but it's not the only version.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, there's something very beautiful, it seems, about what happens during your photo shoots. And I would like you to talk a bit about this, because it seems that during your photo shoot, it's like a story in itself. And I was wondering if you can describe one of your photo shoots and this whole narrative with intimacy and authenticity.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, because it really gets to the guts of, you know, of what I do and why I think it's important. Because when I started photographing women, it was sort of emotionally, visually distant. It was, you know, these women are sculptures and so on. And it became very important to me as I would photograph the same woman over a period of time, and we got to know one another, and there would be this sharing of really, you know, heartfelt, emotional information.
Yeah.
And so again, this idea of being non-judgmental in hearing, accepting, exploring what women wanted to share. So as I, you know, described that one woman her thing was ropes, and this woman has something else, and that woman has something else. And it just became very important to me to give space to women to explore what they wanted to, because every woman that I photographed was a stand-in for my own attempts to understand myself. And again, because we didn't have visual markers when I was coming out in the 90s. And, you know, so much of what I've tried to do is open up a space for women to tell me who they are. And, you know, as you mentioned, there is an incredible intimacy around that in the photo shoots. And, you know, I never wanted to impose my needs, desires, objectives, you know, on what happened in the photo shoots. I wanted to hear what these women wanted to tell me. And so there's an incredible vulnerability and intimacy that happens with that, because you're putting yourself out there. These women that I photographed put themselves out there in a way that I don't think I could ever have done with someone. You know, to basically say, okay, you know, we've let other people define us pretty much our entire lives. You know, these are the things that are important to me. These are the things this is how I want to be seen, you know, and I think that's the most intimate part of, photographing anyone, any, whether it's nude, a woman, anything that you photograph, opening up that space so that someone can tell you how they want to be seen. I think is just incredibly important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really beautiful as well.
Thank you.
Would you say that there is a real need for women to express this need?
Oh, I think it's foundational. I think, because as something else I've often said is, if we don't do this, someone else will. If women don't do this, men are left to tell this story alone. And, oftentimes they get it right. Oftentimes they get it great. But there's just something that we can add, and authenticity we should be able to add into this conversation. So yeah, I've often also said that repression is the enemy, and unless we open up the space for us to tell ourselves these stories, one another these stories, we don't define ourselves, other people will, and that's been happening since the beginning of photography.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm interested in this idea of authenticity and representation that you mention and work with all your art. And this concept of depicting authenticity and women and their body in their representation. You also say it's critical, to you that women feel their voice are being heard and their desire are being reflected. And, I also think it's really a major thing for women to be expressed authentically, because so many times, whether it's through our visual culture or just society in general, women are pushed to be expressed a certain way or to express themselves a certain way. And this is really changing the balance. It's reversing the scale in a way, to me. So this is really major.
It's funny for me too, because so much of the push for me to sort of realize this was some early trips that I made to Paris when my relationship back then was sort of failing, and I was really in a sort of in between stage. And so what do women do, especially American women do? They go to Paris. Yes. So I started shooting in Paris, and I was living in LA at the time, and I think, Paris as a concept also helped me open this up, open up this dialogue, because again, Paris is a lightning rod for freedom for so many people, women around the world. And I was so influenced by, some of the artists and writers, especially the Americans that lived in Paris in the 1920s, and all of the women that lived in the left bank. And so when I started regularly going to Paris in 2011 and 12, that really opened up and broadened the type of photography that I was doing with women, because everyone would come to Paris as this magnet for freedom. Yeah, and there are so many quotes. There are a couple of African American writers that write about their experience fleeing racism, in the Americas, in America in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and how going to Paris let them breathe in a way.
Yeah.
I think it was Gordon Parks who said, he felt that Paris helped put distance between him and those soiled years in America. And I think that's very much what it felt like for me too, when I started going to Paris and I started feeling a visual, artistic, sexual freedom that just to me was absent in the United States. To go to Paris as a lesbian, sort of steeped in the knowledge of, Gertrude Stein and Alice Toklas and, all the lesbians on the left bank. It opened up a door to freedom to me that, then all of these women that I started photographing in Paris, they ran through that door. It was this beacon of freedom of expression for so many women. It was, and I guess that could be true in a lot of places. I mean, you go somewhere that's different or you're not familiar with, and it's exotic in a way. But yeah, always. But, sort of basing so many realizations, on what Paris represented to so many women that I met. So it was that was the first time that it really sort of opened up to me as the way that I wanted to shape my work, in terms of giving a voice to the women that I was photographing.
Yeah, I found that changing location is, especially to Paris, but changing location in a general way gives you some kind of extra freedom because people don't know you. So you can really start to invent your own identity the way you want it. And it seems to be easier than to convince everybody that already knows you, where you already, where you grew up, that no, this is actually me. You've been seeing me wrong all this time. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think so much of that is too, we see ourselves wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
We when I knew that I was a lesbian, I grew up in Philadelphia on the East Coast of the US. And as I started to come to that realization, I went about as far across the country as you could go. I moved first to Portland, Oregon to go to law school, and my mother I would have kept going, but I hit water, and it's like I took all that time and distance to not to reinvent myself, but to understand myself from ground up, and it's true. And I think this is why visual imagery is so important, because we imprint so many things from other places and other sources about who we should be. And, if you're not being represented authentically, if your experience, your desires are not being represented authentically in that's a really tricky thing to find some peace within yourself.
Yeah. So now let's talk about pleasure versus pressure.
Okay.
Pressure from the art world and from society. What was your experience to make it as a woman photographer, to make it as a woman lawyer, etc., etc.? Did you have all good and wonderful, it's honky-dory?
It's always been a walk in the park. Yeah, totally. No, certainly as a lawyer, I always felt as a woman that I had to work twice as hard. And I was a very, very, very good lawyer. I don't know that I fully realized at the time, but because I was always so over-prepared, and I was pretty young, when I started walking into courtrooms. So I had to really work 3 times as hard, as a woman, as a younger woman. And certainly as a woman photographer doing female erotic nudes, people don't know where to slot that. I often, it's like, I often get this discussion of, whether it's pornography or it's exploitive or, I've had one publisher, at least one publisher, and one very well-known male photographer of female nudes just totally walk away from me when my work became more erotic. So when they could understand it as this very, woman on a rock, distant, sculptural, non-emotional, non-challenging, non-threatening work, they loved it. But then, when it became more authentic and erotic, they walked away from it. And I had one photographer, one male, very well-known male photographer, tell me, and this just blew my mind. He looked at some of my more erotic work as it started to become more authentic. And he said, in so many of your pictures, so many photographs, the women have their chins up. And I find that to be just such a show of arrogance, that gesture just seems so arrogant to me. And it crystallized everything for me in just a moment. To me, that symbolizes grace and beauty and power, the uplifted chin and, the strong neck. And he found it to be arrogant. And, I found it to be just emboldening and empowering. And, from that relation on, I sort of never looked back.
Yeah.
He also told me, he was great to me in the beginning of my career, introduced me to collectors and things. And he basically told me that if I published some of my more erotic work, my career would be over. And he wasn't entirely wrong about that. It becomes much more difficult for people to accept authentic erotic representations of women.
Mm.
They're too threatening. I mean, he also told me to make sure that I didn't reveal my sexual orientation or the sexual orientation of some of my models to collectors, because for them, the experience of collecting nude photographs of women was about access. And if they felt that they actually didn't have access to these women, they would be very threatened. They wouldn't be interested in the work and so on.
Mm.
So all of these things just sort of cascade to making me feel like what I was doing was even more important for me.
Yeah.
And it may have harmed, my relationships with collectors, with institutions, but it helped me understand who I was. And from what I hear from a lot of women I photographed, it helped them accept and understand things about themselves.
Yeah. So would you say it gave you the power to keep going, actually?
Yeah, and certainly because I had no other choice. It's like once you step off the plank, you just keep going.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's I guess the water is down there somewhere, but I'm still sort of floating through space, doing what I feel like I have no other choice to do at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess this is the difficult part when you start doing something that's not in the norm and people are not used to it. Sometimes it gets very, you get thrown a bit left and right, and it's very hard to hold your ground without questioning yourself. And I find this, it's very interesting what you're saying, how it gave you the power to keep going and to really even push even more.
Yeah, I think Gary Winogrand is sort of an excellent test case in all of this. It's like when I had photography classes in college, the received wisdom was that Gary Winogrand's Women Are Beautiful was one of the, and no pun intended, one of the seminal works of photography.
Yeah.
This was a master photographer. And it was only years later that I realized that I found Winogrand's Very Beautiful work more exploitive than the most erotic pornography out there. He was taking photographs of women on the street, invading their spaces in a way where they had no say, no consent, and things like that. I think that any pornography, any erotic photography where a woman is fully authentically present and representing herself is so much more real.
Yeah.
And it's like very few people question Winogrand's work. I saw an amazing article on it a few years back. I think it was by Jörg Kohlberg, who's something like, here's a photograph of someone I didn't take. And he talked about the ethics of street photography and the dignity of the person being preserved. And,
Yeah.
So I just think there's so many photographers of the female nude, of women of the female nude over time, where the received wisdom is that this is great, and there's not a moment where people stop and think about how the women in the photographs feel about the way they're depicted.
Yeah, that's true.
And actually, I'm really looking forward to this as well. In April, I have a current exhibit alongside Helmut Newton in Barcelona, and so I'm really excited about being able to open a dialogue, because so much of his imagery used, the perception of lesbianism, and women together, and for me as an authentic, real live lesbian to exhibit alongside him, with real live queer, women depicted, I think is going to be a fascinating dialogue. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is great. This is very exciting.
Come to Barcelona in April.
Yes, I will. So you have 2 books coming out in November. The second edition of your book, Paris.
Correct.
And a new book called Polaroids.
Let me do Paris first. Paris the second first. It originally came out in 2013, and it's been sold out and out of print for quite a while. So we decided to revisit it, and we'll have about 10 to 12 new images swapped out for some old images, a slightly different format, and so that's exciting. And so it's fun to revisit that because, as I discussed, Paris was such a turning point for me, shooting that book in 2011 and 12, and sort of giving me the the permission to walk through a certain door of freedom. And so it's fun to revisit that. And then Polaroids has been in the works for a while, and it's about 100 images from old Polaroid Type 55 film. And
Cool.
yeah, and it was expired. Yeah, it was expired back when I used it, and I haven't been able to get my hands on it for a very long time, of course. But these are nudes, some of my most erotic work, actually. So some of my previous supporters turn critical, have their heads blown when they see some of this work. Yeah, these photographed a number of women couples and who were just extremely fantastic and authentic and definitely had something to say.
Yeah.
So those images are scans of Type 55 positives. And so both of those books they're actually at the printers right now. So they should be coming out in the next few weeks, where I'm still waiting on a date. Yeah, everything is sort of off with COVID, but
for sure.
hopefully in the next few weeks.
For sure. Yeah, this is great. Do you have any messages for all women to help them look inside to their authenticity and keep going and expressing themselves in this art world?
Yeah, I think if anything, it would be empower yourself, and for God's sake, empower other women.
Yeah.
There was another book of female nudes that came out a while ago that didn't have a single female photographer in it, and it was edited by a woman. And it just, how in the world in 2021 are women not lifting up other women and allowing the diversity of our experiences to shine through? It's so exciting to see how much queer work is being done right now and how it's being elevated. But, there's a tendency, I think, in the art world to say, okay, so we did that one. It's like we did one, we did one photographer. So,
we good.
Yeah. Okay. So we checked that box. We're done now. Nobody said that to Weston. They didn't go to Weston and say, well, Stieglitz already did female nudes of his wife, so you can't, nobody said it to Ralph Gibson or to Iraqi or to, the dozens and dozens and dozens of men who have photographed female nudes. And so, yeah, you can't just have Ruth Bernhard in an exhibit of female nudes. There are women, and again, it's just a matter of giving voice to women's authentic desires and listening to them and supporting one another.
I have one more thing. You created with your wife, Wendy Hicks, in 2018, an organization called Photodefam.
Correct.
And you say, and I quote, with the aim of redirecting the dialogue around images of women so that women themselves could have more agency and authenticity in photography. And you also wrote, invisibility is no longer an option. So with Photodefam, you organize exhibition, and the first one was Women See Women, featured at Portugal's National Museum of Photography, the Centro Português de Fotografia, as part of the Porto Photo Festival in October 2018, and then it was shown in the Miami Photo Festival and the Indian Photo Festival. So this is incredible.
Yeah, thanks so much. And we actually had one solo freestanding show, separate and apart from other photo festivals, that we did at a chateau in north central France. It was in October 2020, so we managed to squeak one in as COVID was still very, very iffy. So yeah, unfortunately, we put the festival on ice for a little bit until COVID clears up a bit. But it's so important to us, and thank you so much for highlighting it. We started Photodefam as a way to, as you said, redirect the images around women, the dialogue around images of women. And we opened it up worldwide to male and female photographers, because for us, the aim was to promote the most empowering images of women, no matter where they came from. And so, women, men, non-binary, we wanted to see the most enriching, empowering images of women and girls. And so we managed to, get one freestanding exhibit in before COVID really shut things down. And we're looking forward to getting back to that. when we do restart that, we'll be doing a call for entries for photographers all around the world.
Excellent.
Because again, this is such a core principle for my work and who I want to be and who I want to have in my world and the way I want women to be perceived. The motto for Photodefam is women can't be heard if we can't be seen. And, it's just, again, a nod to how powerful representation is, how powerful visual imagery is in defining women and what we can do and what we can desire and what we can achieve and who we can be. All of that comes from visual representations. We imprint that stuff so early and so, not a minute a day goes by where we're not deluged with images of women. And again, if we're not helping shape what that's about, we're going to be defined by somebody else.
It's true. True. Super important. Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. I can't wait till we can do it in person.
Yes, exactly. Thanks for listening to this great conversation. I think I cannot stress enough how important it is for us to communicate, to stay in touch, and to exchange for empowering women. I think this conversation is a great example of that, and she uses so many references that can really reveal how important it is for women to stick together for a more equitable society and for the future of everyone. Thank you. This podcast is supported by Pro Helvetia, the Swiss Arts Council, the Republic and Canton of Geneva, and the city of Nancy in Switzerland. We are so thankful for their support and commitment to women, culture, and the arts. Thanks for listening to Raw and Radical Women in the Arts podcast. Learn more about our featured artists and sign up for news and updates by visiting our website rawradical.com.
Organic, radical, profound.
Please consider leaving us a comment and review on your preferred podcast listening platform to help others discover the show and take part in this global dialogue.
She, intuitive.
I am Maureen Broadbeck, and until next time, keep the dream alive.
Woman.